were going to be at home and the whole thing, but that wasn't the case. They lost a game they really should have won. They had to win. They needed 2 points to be home against Quebec. They aren't. Anybody have any thoughts on
well, they also had some further incentive tonight, too.
Oh, did they ever?
For the Power Ratings Award. And gave up one power play goal and lost that. They still would get $25,000 for being conference leaders. But
I was watching that game. The first period, I kept saying, well, this game can be had by the Buffalo Sabres because Montreal, as far as I was concerned, was simply going through the motions. So guys like Robinson, Tremblay, Green.
And they didn't dress Gainey.
And they didn't even dress Gainey, who's certainly one of the top defensive players in the league. And the game was there if they wanted it. Obviously, the Sabres did not want it bad enough. And it's a terrible disappointment as far as I'm concerned. I know there were 16,500 people there that were terribly disappointed also.
Well, when you look at the fact that when Montreal came back and tied it up at 3-3, they were probably thinking at that point, well, hey, this is ridiculous. We can win this game. We were behind 3-1, and all of a sudden, bang, we're tied 3-3, so let's go on and win it. Even though it doesn't mean that much, as far as Montreal was concerned, they thought, let's see what can happen, and away they went.
Well, they let him back in the hockey game, that's for sure. And getting back to what Rick said, there was $100,000 at stake also in the Stroh's power rating. Plus, it was a very important hockey game tonight, naturally, for that home ice advantage. And what better reasons to win a hockey game? I mean, everything was there for them tonight, and it didn't happen. Like Jimmy said, they came in, I think, well, it wasn't a do-or-die situation for the Canadians tonight. But they got to the point where they said, hey, hold it. A little bit of extra effort here and we can win this hockey game. We can turn it on for one period. And that's exactly what happened.
You know, 17 shots on goal. I mean, that's awfully poor. That's a very poor offensive output. You've just got to put more offensive pressure on anybody.
They only had 4 in the second period.
Yeah.
And that's when they had a chance to dominate the game. They had a 3-1 lead. They get 4 shots in the second period when they owned the game, when all the players should have been on the Montreal side of the ice. 4 shots on goal.
And the sad part is that all year long we've been saying they can't score goals, can't score. They scored 4 goals tonight. That doesn't happen very often with the Buffalo Sabres.
2 of those goals shouldn't have gone in.
Well, there's a couple of goals that shouldn't have gone in.
Well,
you can say in the final
the last 3 or 4 games in the Sabres case, you can say that.
Jim, you bring up a point there, though, and that is you had Tom Barrasso out, who, incidentally, we talked to tonight and said he would be okay for the playoffs. But without Tom Barrasso in there, and this is not really taking a shot at Bob Sauvé, who did not play a strong game tonight and did not play a strong game in Boston, but the way it appears to me is without Tom Barrasso in the nets, the Sabres, I don't think they have a prayer of beating a team like Quebec.
Yeah, but
with him, they've got a shot.
Well, the thing is with Barrasso,
with that.
Even though Barrasso has not been on skates lately, okay, he's got to go in against the first game on Wednesday night in Quebec City. Now, Tom Barrasso has not been, he's not been practicing. He skated today for the first time, I think.
Tough situation.
Yeah, now
It'll be nearly a week since he's touched the puck. It'll be nearly a week.
It's going to be touch and go, so very early in that hockey game, if Scotty Bowman decides to go with Tom Barrasso, he's going to have to really keep an eye on him, I think, early in that hockey game. Either he has it or he hasn't.
Well, I think it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. What are you going to do? You have a goaltender, Sauvé, who is a much better goaltender than the way he's played in the last couple of games. I think everybody would agree with that.
A better playoff record than a regular season record, by the way.
Fame is fleeting, too. Let's remember a couple of years ago in Montreal when he
That's right. He shut him out back to back. He was sensational. But you have to go with Barrasso. He's your #1 goaltender. So what do? Obviously, I don't think Barrasso is going to be, I don't expect him to be that sharp. I think anybody who's out of game conditions for over a week, it's going to be, a week and a half, really, by the time he gets back into action, could run into some problems. So what do?
They can't even protect themselves in their own building, having to play up there, opening up on the bigger ice surface, in a building they've historically had problems with, not just this season, but in the last few years. They could be in for some serious problems up there.
What am I hearing here, though, is either if Tom Barrasso does not play, the Buffalo Sabres do not have a chance to win against the Quebec Nordiques?
Scotty Bowman said last night, or at least he was quoted as saying, he said to Dornhofer, who was on Hockey Night in Canada, he says, if I don't have Barrasso, I can't win. That was his quote.
Well, I disagree with Scotty Bowman.
Well,
I'm really surprised you would say something. I'm really surprised you would say something like that.
Why would you be surprised?
I just don't think that's something you'd want to say with a goaltender that's possibly you're going to have to go into the playoffs with.
Well,
think
why
what
wouldn't
he's
you?
saying
Then
here-
why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he play
I
Sauvé
don't think,
as much as
if I was a
Barrasso?
player, I wouldn't want my coach saying that. That's as simple as that. I'd want to go in there as much confidence as I possibly can. If that's what he said,
If I were a coach, I
That's
wouldn't
what,
want to be.
that's what
I would be set
Dornhofer
back.
quoted him as saying.
If I were a
No,
coach, I
that's-
wouldn't want my team losing the last game of the season the way they
I
did
have a
it
hard
either.
time believing that he'd say something like that. I really would.
Well, you know, the goaltending, they say, is the big part of the playoffs. So when you look at Quebec, they've got 3 goaltenders,
everything.
one of 3 that they can stick in there that probably will play well. Buffalo is down to 1, and, well, you got 2 goaltenders, but you don't know how well Brasso's going to be able to play when he comes back from this allergy. Now, he says he's all set and ready to go, but he's still been off skates.
Well, what are they going to do about scoring goals, even if they have goaltending? What are they going to? How are they going to solve that problem? Are they going to
there's
press
a
this little
problem in
magic
Quebec.
button here, and all of a sudden the Sabres are going to turn into a great offensive threat?
Look at the games they won. With stellar goaltending, and they came down the stretch. They won a 3-2 game, a couple of 2-1 games, but the games they had to win. The games they absolutely had to win. They got blown away.
You see, you have to remember the key players that are getting the shots. The most shots are probably right now like players like Foligno and Perreault, and they're not producing right now offensively. Now, I really think Perreault and Foligno are capable of doing that, but all of a sudden it's going to have to turn around in an
Well,
awful
I
big
think-
hurry
I think
because to
Perreault's-
complement the defensive play.
I think Perreault's pulling his weight. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. I mean,
But not as
Gilbert-
far as putting the puck in the
Well,
net, Jimmy.
putting the puck into the
No,
net,
but all of a sudden-
But he certainly is
all of a
playing
sudden,
well.
Rick
You can't have
Rick
Perreault
Feeling
play
has
any
become
better
a
than he's
goal
playing right
scorer
now.
since he went up on
Well,
that
we all
line.
talk at once.
We usually do.
The other thing is, though, the effort's there. I don't think there's any doubt about that whatsoever.
Well, you can't get
That's
a good
right.
scoring chance
That's
unless you put an
exactly
effort
right.
into it. And they are putting the effort into the scoring opportunities, but nothing's happening. They just shoot the puck and poof, no cigar.
Well, something happened. They scored 4 goals tonight and lost the hockey game.
That's what I was...
Yeah, but also, I'm going to tell you something else about Sautard. I was asking one of the writers from Montreal. He said, well, what's good about Sautard? How do you score on him? He said, shoot the puck. So I don't know.
17 shots. That's not exactly.
Well, I talked to one
Told
of
you
the...
that, Fisher?
Well, as a matter of fact, Red Fisher, I asked who was going to start in goal tonight for Montreal. He said Sautard. He said Penny's played an awful lot, and he said this is probably Sautard's swan song. So, in other words, it looks like he won't be around next year. After the first couple of goals, maybe he's right.
Red also said Penny was the key to that hockey club this season also.
Well, I think we have to turn our attention to the home game, losing the home game against Quebec. And I've always been an advocate of going into the playoffs. I don't think it makes a whole lot of difference where you open a series. But I think in this case, the Sabres have had a limited success, I guess you could say, against Quebec. But they've had success.
Lost 9 straight.
Well, no. But I'm saying, let me make my point.
Quebec.
In Quebec. In Buffalo, they haven't lost a game this year. So generally, the way I looked at it, I really thought that the home game would be a critical point for them to obtain, simply from a confidence standpoint. The last time the two teams met, Buffalo maybe played the best game that they've played since the All-Star break. I mean, they really did play a strong game.
See, it's a hard thing to figure about this club. They played a super game. They took the body that night. They hit everything in sight. They out-physicaled them. They knocked Quebec all over the lot. Now tonight, huh? Is that
I don't know what to do with them here.
I heard an athlete use that one time.
I think it'll be fine for the Sabres to go on the road. I think that's a good deal for them to go on the road and start the playoffs.
Now, wait a
series
minute.
off the
You
way
were
things are
an
running right now.
advocate of saying that they
No, I
started
didn't
at
say
home.
that,
That's
Jimmy.
what you
I
said.
didn't
You
say that. I
that
said
you
the
should
extra
start at
home game is what I'm talking about. The extra home game. You said it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but
The
wouldn't you
extra home
rather...
game, I think it does. The extra home game means an awful lot. You tell me of a coach in the National Hockey League that go into this series and they have a choice coming down to the final game. You want to play it at home or on the road? Well, of course they're going to want to play it at home. I think the game. It was important that they win tonight to get that extra home game. Whether it starts on the road or at home, I think I would rather, if I had a hockey club, I'd rather start at home, but it's not the end of the world to start on the road.
I
But it's the extra
I
home
certainly
game.
wouldn't
How
want
do
to
you get
start
the
at
extra
home?
home game if you don't start at home?
Pardon me?
How do you get the extra home game if you don't start at home? I don't understand that.
Well, the thing is, after what's happened in Quebec City in the last 10 games, as Jim mentioned, Kelley, the fact that they have not won there in the last 10 games. They've lost 9 in a row in the regular season and 1 playoff game. And I know going back to last year, they lost the first the 2 playoff games here, opening at home, but they would have that better chance if they could open at home. Unfortunately, they're not. So
You have to go back to that 0-0 tie to the last time they
That's
picked
right.
up a point in Quebec. And they didn't score a goal in that game.
And Sauvé wasn't going.
Sauvé was
right.
a goal. Right. Sauvé's taking a lot of heat right now, and deservedly so.
Yeah.
He has shown no signs of getting any better
But I still think, too, you still have to understand, this was, what, his 27th appearance tonight, I think, overall. I mean, he hasn't seen a lot of pucks being shot at him. And
exactly.
And, you know, I mean, you really can't expect a whole lot. And
saw a lot tonight.
This is what you're talking about when you talk about the unforeseen and having two goaltenders that are sharp, and right now we don't have that.
We don't have that.
Do we have any update on Dave Andreychuk's situation, when he'll be back?
I spoke to Scotty in the locker room after the game, and at first he said he didn't expect to have him for the first few games. But then he went out and checked with the doctor and said they were going to re-examine him tomorrow and that he would hold off and make a decision, or get a decision from the medical staff tomorrow afternoon.
You know, one thing we've talked about the Sabres and their problems against Quebec, but you know, Quebec is not a world beater. I mean, that team is choked before their team, it seems to me, really, and that's a word I know athletes love, but it seems to me that any time you put a lot of pressure on that team, if the Sabres can put a little bit on
That's the key,
I mean,
right
Bouchard,
there.
look at Bouchard. There's a guy that can be a world beater, but you put a couple behind him and he can be a sieve.
I don't think anybody here is saying that the Sabres can't do well in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But I think you got to back up and examine what they've done through the regular season, and there's not a whole lot of reason for hope. They started poorly. They put it together briefly, where they put together an extraordinary string of tight, physical, good checking hockey, and they went off on a tear right up to the All-Star break, and basically they faltered since then.
What happened after the All-Star break? I mean, it's more than Bill Height. I mean, you can't. I mean,
Well,
that
no
was a
question
factor,
that the injury to Billy Height hurt him, but
didn't help.
basically, according to the players, and this is a hard thing to get a handle on because if you knew what the problem was, you'd certainly go out and correct it. But a 5-day layoff for some of the players, and that hurt. The things they were doing well, you forget what it takes to do things well and how hard it is to do it.
But I think, too, you have to, I still have a very positive attitude because I look at a stretch, and I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but they won something like 25 games and lost 3 times or 4 times. I'm not sure what it was. So they're very capable, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. I wouldn't be surprised to see them eliminated in 3 straight, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them in the Stanley Cup playoffs because that's the kind of a team that they've been all year.
finals.
Or in the finals, I'm sorry.
You're saying they're streaky, and that's it. But we all know how Quebec's going to play. We know what Michel Bergeron's going to do. He's going to leave the Stastnys and Goulet on the bench, fill the penalty box, get them down so they're 2 men short, and then throw them out in the ice. How many times has he done that?
Yeah.
Lots and lots and lots.
Yeah, but I think Scotty knows he's going to do that.
Oh, well, sure. I'm not saying
I don't
that
think
he's
he's been that successful doing that against Buffalo.
But he sure tried to do it.
Well, he'll try. Sure he
Darn
will.
right he is.
How could you say that? They went out in 3 straight to Quebec last year.
Say what?
How they weren't successful doing against that.
No, I mean, but he's talking about going,
I'm
having
talking
people
about
in the
the
penalty
strategy
box.
that he
I'm
uses,
talking
and you
about.
know he will. You know he will.
But when you look at the number of goal scorers that the Quebec Nordiques have as compared to the Buffalo Sabres, I mean, they've got one, well, they got 2 30-goal scorers, and one's out of the lineup right now, and Dave Andreychuk. Now, the Nordiques seem to be able to score at will, and defensively, they've helped themselves an awful lot with the addition of Brad Maxwell and that deal that sent Tony McKegney to Minnesota. As I mentioned before, they've got the 3 goaltenders. They can take their choice of the 3, who's ever playing better. And overall, I think they've got the better production. They got better scoring.
Well,
and the Sabres have not scored more than 3 goals in Quebec and at the Coliseum in the last
I
2
liked
Sabres are
Quebec
better
until the
defensively.
last game, and now all of a sudden, I think that's that last game, that fine game they played against Quebec, I think they can really hang their hat on that. They just came out and they went right for the jugular vein. They handled them physically, and they went on the offense. They didn't stand back and take this complete defensive posture for 60 minutes. They went out and they challenged them offensively, and they challenged them physically, and they really beat Quebec good that night.
What do you think?
Cup playoffs, the pressure is on the home team because what you're doing, if you're the visiting club, you're trying to go in there and win 1 game because if you win 1 game, I mean, obviously you have the momentum going. If you lose the first game, you can say, okay, now we came to Quebec or we've arrived here in Montreal to win 1 of the 2 games. So if we can do that, then we can just turn the whole thing around. And that's the way a visiting team will look at it. And I really think that there's a whole lot of pressure.
But on the other hand, the home team can say, well, wait a minute, if they can win in our building, we can win in their building.
Yeah, well,
sure,
you know,
they will say that, of course.
That's exactly what happened 2 years ago. You look at the Sabres, they open on the road at Montreal, they go in there, shut them out twice with Bob Sauvé in goal, both games.
And unless
then they open on the road at Boston, they beat Boston like 7-4. Tony McKegney had a couple goals, I think.
Had they not blown a home game
then,
in that series,
that's right.
they would have won that series.
They also got blown out, if I remember right. I think
9-1
by the Bruins or 9-0 or whatever it was. And
I
they
think
came
wait a
back and
minute
won
now,
again, and
there's gotta-
everybody counted them out
We
at that
gotta
point in time.
there has to be another point made. We went into last year going down the stretch. We lost our way into the playoffs. We haven't done that this year. Okay, we didn't win tonight, but we've won the last 5 of the 7 games.
You,
So we have-
you mean
we-
the
it's
I'm
Sabres?
talking about.
Well, Jimmy can say that.
He's
He can
putting
say
himself
that.
in the position
warned
of what
him,
they're
But they
saying.
haven't lost away, though. You say they haven't lost away, but we're just discussing that there's so much at stake tonight. Did they lose their way tonight? It was absolutely such an important game. There's
Not
so
just
much at stake, and even the $100,000. So they're talking about in the Stroh's power rating.
Well,
I mean,
not just tonight, but Thursday night as well. You can say what you want. They won 5 out of the last 7,
That's
but they
right.
lost the 2 games they had.
Well, okay, you can go
But
and
if they
say
hadn't
Quebec.
won the 5 out of the 7, what good would it have done them, Jim?
Well, that's
They
right.
wouldn't have
You
been that
don't
close
know that
anyway.
at the time. You don't know that at
That's
the time.
right.
You
Quebec-
come in and you know you got to win, but you got to that Boston game and you knew you absolutely had to win.
thank goodness Buffalo won that last game against Quebec. I'll tell you that much, because right now I love Quebec, except I don't know if I like Quebec that much in the series. I certainly like them a little more in the Sabres, but not as much as if they wouldn't have won that
If
game.
they hadn't won that
Yes.
game, we'd be using these Sabres to do it.
Well, they lost. They lost to Hartford twice. I mean, Quebec.
Went into Montreal for their
Everyone's
biggest
losing
game of the year, and they blew them out 7-1, or
but
whatever
we're
the
gonna
score was. And then they go into Hartford to the game that they had to win, and they lost.
I want
not
to know
getting
why.
the kind
I
of
want to
quality
know what's
scoring
going on
you're
in
playing
Boston
either.
anyway. What's this using Deskalakis and the two of the big
Well, and then he
guys?
doesn't. And then he doesn't dress his 4 best players.
Well,
I'd
I
say Harry Sinden certainly orchestrated the final outcome
Well,
of the Adams division.
There's no doubt about that
Well,
whatsoever.
I
What
think
they
you're going a
tried
little
to
too
say
far
in
in
the
that.
come on.
What they
They-
tried
they-
to say. Well,
He
what
lost
they
to
tried to say
Quebec.
in
He
the
lost to
Boston-
Didn't go with his
Montreal.
best.
He beat
They-
the Sabres.
Quebec
I happened to
especially.
watch a large part of that game last night, and Harry Sinden wanted to win that game, and so did the Boston Bruins, and they should have won it.
Well, there's no question that they didn't want to win.
Well, they didn't lay down and die, that's for
say
sure.
they just rolled over and tossed it.
You're going back to the Thursday game when they played Boston, Quebec.
Quebec.
The reason Daskalakis, he played him. He supposedly wanted to get him some playing time in case he had to use him.
And who else was that?
Terry O'Reilly sat out only because probably his body is so battered.
Oh, yeah, but
The
his
reason
body
they
wasn't
arrested-
battered when
had the
Buffalo
brain?
came to
Well,
town.
Butch,
Looked great
well, he
against
got him
them.
back in the lineup. Butch Goring, he needs a rest. He can't go. I mean, he needs a little
His
bit.
helmet needs a rest. He's okay.
Mike O'Connell. Mike O'Connell arrested him supposedly because he had dental work and his face was all puffed out and he couldn't play.
How would you
Boy,
how
you
would
were
you like to
defending
be
a guy
fan
you used to
paying
work with.
$20?
Didn't you?
How would you like to be a fan paying $20 to see the Boston Bruins play that night?
Hey, let's get the wife and kids
I wanna
together.
read
loved
one.
it because they
Let's
won.
go get the wife and kids together and see
I wanna
Cleon
read it.
Daskalakis.
What you're forgetting, though, when somebody's
What is that, a salad?
in a position, when somebody's in a position like that, they can afford to sit players out. I mean, what the heck? Why not sit them out? Why should
Did
anybody
anybody
put
criticize
scoring who's-
Montreal last year when they finished in 4th and they sat out a few of the guys?
Harry
Why doesn't
Sinden-
the league criticize Boston
Why don't
Bruins?
you ask me if they sat them out? I don't know if they did or not.
I think the fans got a bum deal that night. That's what I feel. That's what upsets me.
I
We
think
know
it
that
always
there's-
comes down to the fans. I
But
mean,
there's bad feeling between Harry and Scotty that goes back.
Wait a minute. There's
there
bad
is.
feeling between Harry and Michel Bergeron.
Well,
He called Bergeron
yeah.
everything
Yeah.
in the last 2 years that you can imagine.
Yeah,
Well, that
well,
was
These
back to
goons,
training
he
about
sends
very
out goons, that's
competitive
the way he
people.
plays. And
There's
there
not,
you go.
there
there's
is a
not
great deal of
spoken bad
competition.
feelings between Harry
should
Sinden
be.
and Scotty Bowman, but I'm sure there's some resentment about the playoff situation last year when
It changed the playoff
changed the
time.
playoff
at one
time.
Yeah,
Well,
that
go back
was-
over the years, how many times have they faced one another? Of course,
Yeah, they know what the
they're
situation
not
is.
going to be in
They-
love
they
with each
play
other
mind
when it
games
comes
when
to
it comes to
playing the
that,
game.
though.
That's all, but that's
Might
all
be
part of
fine
the
off
game,
the
and I don't
ice,
think
and
you
I
can
don't
really
blame them
point a
for feeling
finger
that
at
way.
any of those people and say, you tanked the game. You tossed it. They didn't do that.
No, I'm not going
Besides, they're not the primary
I'm
concern.
questioning the lineup.
dressing room after. We didn't get a chance to get in, but what was the reaction, and did you have a chance to talk to Scotty?
Well, I did. Scotty didn't have too much to say. He felt that, it would have been nice, but the situation's out of his hands now as far as where he opens and what they do next. The point is that they lost the game, and what they have to do now is get the team ready to produce against the Quebec Nordiques. He made the point that you don't have a lot of time to prepare, but you face these teams all season long. You know what they pretty much know what they got. And I thought the one point he made that made a lot of sense was that the team that wins is going to be the team that's able to put the best players out on the ice. Meaning, if you get your injured players back to playing the way they're capable of playing, and they perform the way you expect them to play, that the Sabres have as good a chance of winning in the division as any of the other.
If Bowman's got any aces up his sleeve, he's not going to tell you anyway, Jim.
Well,
I'm serious. Why would he? He's telling Michel Bergeron then if he does that.
If he told me it's going to be in the paper tomorrow, or it's going to be on this table.
There are a couple aces also.
I think all
could
of us
use a few aces, though.
I think all of us touched on the subject before. Buffalo doesn't score a lot of goals. It's going to come down to the goaltending. I mean, it has to come down to the goaltending. If the Sabres receive outstanding goaltending, they will win the series.
They have the best goaltender in the National Hockey League. Anybody disagree with that?
You haven't seen him in a week.
But how is he going to play?
Yeah, but he didn't get bad in a week.
They're going into the playoffs the
you-
same way they've went the last 3 seasons in a row.
I think
You have
better
no
this year.
idea,
I think
no
better this year
idea
than
what
last
to
year.
expect from them whatsoever.
Yeah, but
Well,
can we,
in that case, but I'm saying that I think they're going on a much more
Tough to get a
positive
read in.
note this year than they were last year.
I've never met a player who didn't go into a game feeling positive.
Oh, yeah?
But,
Oh,
no,
I
wait a
disagree
minute,
with
that's
that.
not what I said.
I disagree
But
with that.
I'm talking about the hockey club as a whole is playing much better now as they were.
I got white
There were
caps
some
on
games
coffee.
where I didn't think
Well,
it was necessarily
there's
going to win. I mean,
reason
it
to
wasn't as positive as it should be.
Last year they were in first place and fell out of it. This year they just kind of stumbled through it, had it, didn't have it, but then did play well at the end. But if you play a game against the Hartford Whalers and you win 2-1, you're not going to see the same kind of scoring opportunities that you saw with the Bruins.